And as the result of his rebellion in verse 12, let's look and see what happens at the conclusion of verse 13. There he wasted all his money on wild living. So now the question is this. What do we do as parents if our child who becomes a teenager announces that they are leaving? Folks, we need to keep this in context. I believe this was a young adult in their teens to some degree. And so this lesson and this message is geared towards youth that are going to be somewhere around the age of 15, 16, and older. If a 10-year-old comes up and says, I'm leaving, what I'm going to teach you will not apply to that 10-year-old. Okay? So it's mainly those who feel like they're mature enough, even though we might disagree with them, they are mature enough to be on their own. That is what we're going to be addressing this evening. Your teenager comes to you and says they are leaving. What is it you and I as parents are going to do? What should we do? I believe there are three things. Now, folks, just let me warn you right now, you're probably not going to like these three responses that I'm going to give you. But you will see these, I believe, very clearly in this passage. And if we handle our child in a biblical fashion, I think the results will be as we would have them to be, as God would want them. The first thing is this. You let them go. And I know that's tough. That's a tough one. Your teenager comes up to you and you know that teenager is not yet ready to be on their own. But they are rebelling and they are demanding and they say, I'm going to do this. Then you let them go. You let them go. Now, we need to notice something in this passage. The boy left for a distant country. See, he didn't go to the next neighborhood. In fact, he didn't even go to the next town down the road. He left to a completely different country. But now, what was the father's response? Did he chase after his son? No, he did not chase after his son. You see, he released the son. He released the son. And folks, if you and I as parents, if we are raising our children in the right way, from the moment they are born, if we are raising them in the right way, from the moment they are born, we are training and equipping them for that one day when they leave the house. You see, our children don't belong to us, they belong to God. And He has given us the privilege to be a part of the process of transferring them from our control to their own control, ultimately to God's control. And if we are raising our children right, then we are raising them to lead at some point. I haven't met a parent yet that says, I hope my child is with me until they become senior adults. Do we have a parent here like that? I mean, oh, really? Okay. Well, forgive me then. I stand corrected. I have now met one parent. Most parents, however, don't view it that way. They want to raise their children to be mature adults and then to be out on their own. And that is the goal. Now, what happens, though, when that day comes, whether it's sooner than we think it should or later than we think it should be or whatever, when that day comes, for most parents, it is a day of anguish. It is a day of pain. Not very many parents want to see their child actually leave the home. We must let them go. Folks, if our child, I'm using the term child, meaning young adult, older teenager, comes to us and say they're going to leave or they want to leave, the tighter we try to hold them, when they've made that bold statement, this is what I'm going to do, you have to understand, when it comes out like that, there's not much discussion involved. It seems like they've already made up their mind what they're going to do. Now, if I try to hold on a lot tighter, guess that's going to cause that child, that teenager to do? They're going to begin to rebel more, and they're going to begin to just hold in a lot more anger and bitterness until they finally explode. We see in this passage that the father let them go, and I think that is sound advice for us. Second thing is, let them make their own mistakes. Let them make their own mistakes. I wonder if there's any of us here tonight who has never made our own mistakes, that we have learned completely from everybody else. See, that's not true for any of us. Even though many times we saw our parents or we saw our peers or we learned it in a book or whatever, and we may know this stuff, whatever, but we still make our own mistakes. Sometimes we just step out there and we mess up. And we have got to allow our children to make their own mistakes. If you'll notice in verse 13, the son made his own mistake. It says he wasted all his money. See, all the inheritance that he got from his father, he wasted it. He threw it away. You see, The son threw away the belief of the parents. The son threw away the morals of his parents. The son threw away the values of his parents. The son threw away the money of his parents. It didn't belong to him. He didn't earn that money. It was given to him. And he threw it all away. Teenagers, I hope you're listening to me. Back there, I hope you're listening to me. Folks, rebellion is always a waste. Not just sometimes. Not even the majority of the times. Every single time when we rebel, it is a waste. That is not only true of teenagers to parents, it is true of us as children of God. When we rebel from God, we're going to have wasted time. We're going to be somewhere we ought not be. And we're going to make bad decisions, and it's because we're not in a right relationship with our Heavenly Father. Well, let's talk about the Father in this passage. Do you think that this father knew his son was going to waste the money? It's speculation on my part, but I'm convinced that he did. I believe that the father knew the son was going to waste the money. Do you think that the father knew that the son was headed for trouble? See, I'm convinced that he knew that. He just knew that the son was not ready to handle it yet, and he knew that that's the road his son was on. You see, the father knew, as we as parents should also learn, that sometimes we're only going to learn lessons in life from mistakes and from pain that's involved. Folks, that's a hard way to learn it, but some of us have to learn that way when we make those mistakes and we suffer the consequences. In fact, Proverbs 20:30 brings that out. It says, sometimes it takes a painful situation to make us change our ways. Parents, I hope you'll hold on to this. Every time that you and I as parents, every time that we take responsibility for our kids, every time we take responsibility for our kids, we are also taking it away from them. See, every time we assume the responsibility that should be our kids, we are also taking it away from them. See, some parents want to raise up their children without them making any decisions. Let me make them for you, child. I'll tell you what you need to wear and think and all these, and let me do it all for you, and if you get in trouble, I'm going to bail you out. And what we are doing is we are taking away a vital learning tool in the life of a child, and that's making their own decisions. And so when you and I as parents, if we take on the responsibility of our children, we're also taking it away from them, and they will grow up not knowing how to make a decision. Have you ever been around someone who an adult that just could not decide what to do? I'll be willing to, not bet you, but I'll use that phrase, bet you, not literally, that in their home, that child was taken away the right to make decisions, and therefore, as an adult, they no longer have the capability of making decisions for themselves. Okay, teaching our children means letting them decide and then to live with their choices, which brings us to letter C. Let them reap the consequences of their choices. Let them reap the consequences of their choices. Now, we see this in verse 14. Now, the son has demanded from the father his inheritance. The father gives it to him, lets him go. The son begins making his own decisions. He's wasted all of his money. And, folks, there are some consequences to that, and we see that in verse 14. It says, about the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land. Here's the consequence. And he began to starve. You know why he starved? Because he wasted his money. See, there is a natural consequence. I believe a God built-in device that when we make the wrong decisions, there are natural consequences in place that's going to happen to us. There is a price tag to rebellion. If you wonder how I can make that statement, I'll remind you of a verse we all know. Whatever you sow, you shall also reap. When you make bad decisions, when I make bad decisions, we are going to reap that decision. And if it's a decision in rebellion, we'll reap that as well. Let's go on, verse 15 and 16. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him to feed his pigs. The boy became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything. Now, if you can picture this in your mind, he has hit rock bottom. This boy, you can't get any lower than where he's at. I mean, he's in a pig pen. This boy at this point has empty pockets. He's got an empty belly, an empty stomach. He's got an empty life. And folks, keep in mind, this is a Jewish boy. You don't get any lower in a Jewish life than being in a pig pen. They didn't like pigs. Didn't have nothing to do with them. And here he is not only in the pig pen, he's wanting to eat the stuff he's feeding them. It doesn't get any lower than that. Now let's go back to the father. Let's go back to the parents in this scenario, in this passage. Don't you think, I mean, I can just picture their outlook and their expressions and maybe even their hearts. Don't you think that every time they heard about their son, their wayward, their rebellious son, don't you think every time they heard about him there was like a knife being stuck in their hearts? See, I can feel that. I can imagine what that must be like. Can you think with me a moment that these parents are just wondering, why? Why, God? Why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to my son? Why is this happening in our family? God, where did we go wrong? Parents, if you have been through this, or if you're going through this now, or if you go through this in the future, please hear this. God created you with a free will as parents, but do you know that your children were created the same way? See, your children, my children, have a free will. And regardless of how outstanding we might be as parents, doesn't matter. They still have the freedom of choice to go the other direction. And I want you to realize this, because parents will sometimes take on all the blame. And I'm not saying that we as parents don't have some blame in it, but sometimes as parents we want to take all the blame, and we shouldn't, because our children, our kids, our young adults are making their own decisions. See, your kids and my kids, they have friends that we don't control. They do. They read books that we don't control. They have teachers that we don't control. Therefore, you and I, as parents, can't take all the blame. So please don't do that to yourself. Don't take all the blame. The situation that your child is either in or may get into is not all of your fault. I hope you'll write this next comment down. Parental responsibility ends where parental control ends. Parental responsibility ends where parental control ends. When your child comes up to you, that teenager, that young adult comes up to you and says, this is what I'm doing, I'm leaving, I'm out of here, I'm going to make my own decisions. In fact, they could actually say I'm staying in the house and making my own decisions. But when they begin to relinquish all the control from you as a parent or from me as a parent, and we no longer have any control, they're no longer going to be influenced or listen to us, then we are no longer responsible for what they do or say. And parents, you need to hold on to that. You're not responsible if they're making their own choices. Okay? Let me talk to you about God for just a moment. Is God a perfect parent? God is a perfect parent. Well, if God is a perfect parent, and He is, does God have rebellious children? See, every one of us, maybe to varying degrees, but every one of us is a child of rebellion to some degree. And folks, if a perfect Father, God, has rebellious children, then we, as humans, imperfect, sinful people, we can also have rebellious children, wayward children. Don't feel overly guilty about something that you can't control. I know that it's tough to let your own kids suffer. I'm the youngest of 7, and I saw several of my older siblings, and me to a small degree, praise the Lord, go through some things that my parents didn't want none of us to go through. But when we made our own choices, we had to go through it. And it was not easy on our parents, just as it's not easy on us as parents if our children are suffering to some degree. But we have to remember, it's probably the only way they're going to learn. Do you know that God employs this same method? See, God usually does not come in and swoop down and take you out of that situation that you've got yourself into. He doesn't come into my situations that I got myself into and go, hey, okay, Russ, let me take you out of that. Come over here. Oh, you're a great guy. He doesn't do that. But He does say, Russell, I love you. He's saying, Christian, He loves you. And He's going to help you through that situation that you got yourself in. But folks, He ain't going to take you out of it. Not normally. He's not going to take you out of it. You're going to have to go through it if you got yourself in it. Now, the temptation for us as parents is that when our child has hit bottom, the temptation for us is to intervene and to bail them out. It's a natural tendency because we love our children. We don't want to see them suffer. We don't want them to be going through what they're going through. And so the natural inclination is to jump in and bail them out. But listen to me, don't do that. Don't do that. Because they will not learn the lesson that they need to learn. The lesson that they will learn, if you and I do that as parents, if we jump in and help them out every single time, this is the lesson that they're going to learn. I can do whatever I want, and at some point, Mom and Dad will jump in there to help out. That's what they're going to learn if we keep running to their rescue. It is a bad lesson to teach our children. You see, they must live out the consequences of their own choices and decisions. Now, in this passage that we looked at, the father did not intervene when his son was in rebellion. And because he did not intervene, the son naturally went to stage 2, which is reevaluation and regret. Let's begin reading in verse 17. He finally came to his senses, and he said to himself, "At home, even the hired men have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, 'Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired man.'" Something very interesting to see here. In the beginning of this passage, the son's attitude was, "Father, give me what is mine, give me what I want, and give it to me now." It was an attitude of rebellion. It was a haughty attitude, a prideful, arrogant attitude. But now, if you'll notice in verse 19, that attitude has changed completely. Now his attitude is, instead of demanding, he's coming in humility and in a spirit of forgiveness, saying, "Please, Father, please take me." Do you see the shift in the attitude? See, the son has reevaluated his circumstances, and he recognizes that he left everything to gain nothing. Folks, the world looks mighty good to our kids. I mean, with the lights and the action and a lot of the fun that can be out there and all that stuff and the pleasures, it looks great to our kids. But at some point, when they get in the midst of it, they're probably going to figure out that what they just left was so much better than where they're at now. And that's what this son figured out, that he actually had it really good with his parents. Well, because of this, he regrets his choices. He regrets his circumstances. But you know what? I've learned, and I'm sure many of you already know this, many people, maybe some of us, do not change. Do not change until we get desperate. And I mean that not only just spiritually speaking, it's true spiritually, it's also true in our life, in our workplace, with our relationship at home, wherever it may be, whatever it is, our jobs, our careers. Until something gets desperate, we are very reluctant to change. It just seems to be that some people have to get to that level. And you know what? Our kids are the same way. They're just like us as adults. They change when they hit the bottom, just like many of us. And when they hit the bottom, that's when they learn and begin to change. Well, let me share with you what a parent should do during this stage. During this stage, when the son is still gone or the daughter is still gone in rebellion but beginning to reevaluate their situation, 3 things to do. First of all, you pray for your kids. You pray for your kids. That ought to be constant. There ought to be no greater love other than God for us. There ought to be no greater love than a parent for their child. And you and I ought to be praying for our kids. Secondly, we ought to commit our kids to God. We are to commit our kids to God. Let me tell you what I mean by that. We've got to discover that at this point, the child is out of our hands. That the child is out of our control. And when we go to God and we give our child or our children to God, we are saying, "God, I recognize that this situation in my child is completely out of my control, but God, you are in control of all things and all people, and I'm turning them over to you." And that'll give you a peace that God is involved, that God is working things out for His glory, for His good, working in that child's life. But we've got to get to that point where we turn it over to God. God is in control. Thirdly, you and I need to wait patiently for our kids. We need to wait patiently for our kids. And this is extremely hard, because some kids will only be gone a short period of time, maybe a few days or a week or a month or whatever. And some kids, it may be years and years and years. And we have to wait patiently, being fervent in prayer and having love for them. The temptation is going to be that we, as parents, will try to circumvent God's natural discipline, but we need to resist that and let God work things out God's way. Because if we try to circumvent it, we're going to slow things down. Okay, then we move on to stage 3, which is the return. The return. Parents, it's very crucial how we handle the return of our child. Very crucial how we do this. Let's look at verse 20 and following. So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long distance away, his father saw him coming, and filled with love and compassion, he ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. His son said to him, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. But his father said to the servants, Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet, and kill the calf we have been fattening in the pen. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. And so the party began. There are 3 things that we as parents need to do when our child returns. The first one is this: love them faithfully. Love them faithfully. Look at the what it says about the father. It says his father saw him and was filled with compassion, was filled with love. It brings to mind an internal excitement, enthusiasm, love, and he couldn't wait to get to it. See, the father didn't take time to think about what the son put him through and his wife through. He didn't take time to think about, what the child had done. All he knows is, there's my son, and I've missed him, and I love him. And he went quickly to his son, loved him faithfully. That's how we need to treat our children. Love them faithfully. Second thing is accept them unconditionally. Accept them unconditionally. No, we talked about this a little last week, that we need to accept our children as they are. God accepts us as parents just as we are. We need to accept our children just as they are, unconditionally. It says in the passage that the father ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him. Now, you could read between the lines here, because I'll share, you probably already have this figured out. Where did the son come from? Wasn't he just in the pig pen? Hadn't he lost everything? I believe the son came matted up, filthy, stinky, funky. Can I use that word? Can you imagine what that son must have looked like and smelled like? And yet we see no indication that it mattered one bit to the father. He accepted him just as he was. Just as our God takes us, just as we are. When we are blotted with sin, when we are in a state of rebellion, and we probably look dirty and crusty and smelly and funky to him, he accepts us just as we are. And that's what we need to do with our children when they return. Accept them unconditionally. Now, here's what's going to happen, parents, when you and I do that, when we love our children faithfully and accept them unconditionally. Here's what happens. It promotes confession. It just naturally promotes confession. This passage goes on to say that the son said to the father, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. That is an announcement of confession. Parents, can I ask you something? Mainly dads, but also moms. Do we make it easy on our kids to confess? Do we set the stage? Do we have an atmosphere in our home that makes it easy for our kids to come to us and say, Mom and Dad, I'm sorry? We need to think about that. I want to share this with you. The father in this story, of course, is God. It represents God. God is a perfect parent. He didn't make any mistakes in this passage. But I want to share with you, if in this passage that father was one of us, as parents, there would be mistakes. What I'm saying is this: when our child comes to us and they are in a state of confession, you know what we need to do? We need to confess too. We are not perfect parents. We may have been wonderful parents that didn't deserve the child to run off, but it doesn't matter. See, short of being perfect, we need to confess. And what we're doing when we're confessing to our child as they confess to us is we're cleansing one another. We're reestablishing those ties. We're beginning to form that bond of love once again. We're accepting each other just as we are. I wonder how many of us do that. Our child comes to us and says, Dad or Mom or both, I've done this or said that or whatever. And we just leave it at that. Instead of saying, daughter or son, I'm sorry too. I probably didn't do as well as I should have. Or maybe we failed in teaching you this or supporting you here or whatever. See, that's what it means by creating an atmosphere where our children can come to us and say, I'm sorry about this. Okay. Forgive them completely is the third one. You love them faithfully, you accept them unconditionally, and then you forgive them completely. Now, in this passage it says, But his father said to the servants, Quick, bring the finest robe in the house and put it on him. Get a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. Kill the calf that we've been fattening in the pen. We must celebrate with a feast, for this son of mine was dead and has now returned to life. He was lost, but now he is found. Folks, the father didn't hold anything back. Do you know that he restored the son to the same place that he was when he left? That says total forgiveness. See, if he had said, I'm going to give you some things back, that was only partial forgiveness. But the son was immediately restored to the same level that he was when he left. We need to forgive our children completely. And when you and I go to our Heavenly Father and we confess our sins and we confess our rebellion, do you know what the Father does not do? He doesn't rub it in. The Father does not rub it in. He doesn't say, well, I told you so, knucklehead. He doesn't say, if you'd have just listened to me, I knew when you were born you were going to be a wayward child. You see, he doesn't do any of that. He doesn't rub it in. You know what our Father does to us when we go to Him and confess? He rubs it out. He rubs it out. It's as if the sin never existed, and we are restored completely and wholly back to our Father. And that's the kind of forgiveness that we need to extend to our children. One final comment on this. When our child returns, parents, listen, when our children return, we need to give them responsibility. A couple reasons why. First of all, they must not be dependent on us as parents. See, they left, right? Then they came back. They need to understand that they can make it. And they need to have responsibility. Let me kind of give you a scenario or situation of what your child is going to be like at this point, what my child would be like at this point. They come back, and they've returned, they confess, they saw what was not right. Our children, are going to be in a state where they're just totally beaten. They're going to feel like probably that they don't have value, that they can't do it on their own, that they can't make it. Folks, their self-esteem and their confidence are going to be in the pits. And if we say, yeah, come on back in, but you can't do nothing, then we're confirming what they feel about themselves. And we need to begin giving them responsibility in the household or in whatever way that manifests itself. We need to restore their faith. We need to restore their confidence. And we can do that by giving them responsibility. Say, child, I trust you. Take over this part or help me in this or whatever that may be. We need to encourage them and to trust them and to help them grow and mature. We need to give our child a second chance, just as our God, our Father, gives us a second chance and a third chance and a fourth chance. Parents, in whatever areas we may have failed in, God is prepared and ready to forgive us and to restore us. And I venture to say that your kids, my kids, are probably also ready to forgive us. Youth, let me talk to you for just a moment. God is prepared to forgive you as well. Youth being youth, they have a tendency to want to stretch the limits, stretch the boundaries, and most of that is very natural. But I'd like for you to look within yourself and ask yourself, have I been giving my parents fits See, some of us as parents, if we have youth, may be in a state of hurt because we don't understand what our children are doing. We don't understand why our teenagers are acting that way, why they're disrespectful, why they do this or that or whatever. And youth, I'm asking you to think about that. How have you been treating your parents? First of all, I want you to know that if you want forgiveness, God offers it to you. And secondly, your parents, I believe, are ready to give it to you as well. Each parent and each child here must be willing to forgive and to be restored. Now, I know that some of us, in this process, there's a lot of pain involved. See, I know that some of us have a lot of pain involved in this. And it could be from a number of reasons. It could be because a child is in rebellion, has been in rebellion. It could be that as parents, we look back at our own childhood and we didn't have parents like we wished we had. And they mistreated us, and we're still carrying that pain within us. And it transfers to our children that we have now. See, some of us parents are having to deal with pain and anguish, and I recognize that. Some of the children, whether they be youth or kids, may also be dealing with some of the same things. Maybe their parents or parent, or maybe it's just a parent, are not treating them as they should, not loving them as they should, not being in their corner and encouraging them, and that causes pain in the child. And I want you to know tonight, folks, listen, God is ready to receive that hurt. God is ready to receive that pain if you'll give it to Him. If you'll give it to Him. I hope that you won't keep holding on to it. Hope for hurting parents is available. It's also available to kids. And it's through God. And He's offering it to you tonight. Would you bow your heads, please?